Ladies and gentlemen, many of you have been asking me to take a look at Fistweaving, so let's do it. I dodged it a little bit on the beta and the alpha. That's fair. It was in a broken place. Simple as that. I pointed out several times it was completely and utterly garbage, didn't use any mana, so therefore it wasn't worth looking at. But now it's been sort of fixed to where they want it to be. And as it sucks, especially at level 90, mainly due to various factors, but one of the big questions guys are asking me is it due to lack of multi-strike? You know, a big stat that's not really a part of the game yet and is about to be. It's about to become a very big thing. Something that's affecting many specs is that there are stats in the game that aren't exactly prevalent, and they're a big part of how your spec will work once it hits level 100. So it's understandable that many people are saying, is Fistweaving going to be much better when you're like a full multi-strike set at level 100 and able to get full advantage of that? And you've got access, of course, to your level 100 talents, which all specs right now are balanced around, which is why the things are a little bit wonky at level 90 and makes level 90 completely pointless. So I spent the day looking at Fistweaving. Why is there no Fistweaving footage in the background, Preacher? Mainly, probably a quick conclusion here, is Fistweaving isn't exactly viable, certainly in the available content on beta right now. I can't really go into a 5-man and Fistweave without sacrificing my entire team. So there you go. So as always, for the healers, I've chosen the worst dungeon that I did. It was one of the early ones, actually, so several mistakes by me for you guys to chew over and comment on. So, what happens when you can do it? Or when can you do it? Not really in raids. Not really in PvE. I would consider if Fistweaving was something that attracted you towards the Mistweaver Monk, which it did for a lot of people. It's understandable. It's not exactly viable at all, really. The only time you're going to be able to use Fistweaving, even if you're geared for it, is to wait for periods where there's literally no damage and the other healers can handle it, and then you kind of run in and chip away with your damage and try and contribute in that manner and then switch back. Now, that seems like a really easy conclusion, but I have to point out, is it ever going to be viable? Which I think is something people want to know, especially those who did look at the class and think, oh cool, another way of doing melee DPS. When they were looking at the Atonement Disc Priests and seeing they were like a ranged caster while still doing some healing, and then seeing, oh, I like melee and I like healing, so this kind of combines the two, which has attracted me towards it. So I would have to say probably not, and there's a number of reasons for that. One is that Mistweaver Monks are designed around preparation. They're designed around really setting themselves up for when they can hit their mark. They're a niche healer, there's no doubt about that. They're not a major throughput healer, they're not a major absorb healer in any way, and they're a niche healer. They're looking for moments when they can really shine, and that's difficult to come across. And certainly currently, as people keep asking about level 90, it's pointless now because absorbs are absolutely wrecking the game, as they have been through MOP, but it's even worse now with the Holy Nova power. So in level 100, where people are designed not to be at 100% health all the time, and I can say from raid experience that is pretty much the case. People are very rarely at 100% health. You are generally floating around 90 in a good case, and people are taking it easy with their heals. Does Fistweaving become more valuable, or is it going to work? And it's down to this preparation thing, and mainly the integral role that Renewing Mist plays in playing a Mistweaver, is having lots of Renewing Mist rolling around. Now, with Pool of Mists, if you were to take that as your level 100 talent, which give you 3 charges of Renewing Mist, it's a little bit easier, but in terms of that, it actually sacrifices your healing output in Fistweaving, right? So there's a lot of counterpoints going on here with how Fistweaving and the talent system actually affects the Mistweaver overall. What I'm telling you is you can't be a Fistweaver all the time. There's no way that's going to work. It just doesn't do enough healing whatsoever, and you are instantly replaceable. So you then have your choice of level 100 talents. So you could say things like Chi Explosion does way more healing for Fistweavers. Yes, it does. Does it do enough to make it viable? No. Does it take away from this possibility of preparation? So if you go into this downtime period of, oh, it's low healing here, I can go and do some damage, let's break out the Chi Explosion. The problem is you no longer have these 3 charges of Renewing Mist, and therefore your preparation goes completely out the window, as you can't use Renewing Mist while in, what's it called? Stance of the Spirited Crane? I want to say your DPS stance. You can't actually use Renewing Mist in there, so all your preparation goes out of the window entirely, and then you have to stop Fistweaving very early to start building up your preparation again. If you take Pool of Mists, which gives you the 3 charges, helps with that preparation. Remember, you have caps on things like Uplift now. You do way less healing while Fistweaving, so you have to take that into account. Yeah, you just do way less, and therefore you're just Bummerino Town. You do certainly more DPS, because you get extra charges on Rising Sun Kick, but your healing is sacrificed, and therefore it kind of counterintuitive, right? Doesn't really work how we want it to work. So I think that's the answer you guys are looking for. No, not really. It's not going to work. Similar to Atonement. Atonement doesn't really work out now either. Atonement is a thing that exists, but basically the DPS of a Disc Priest is designed around the idea of just getting Archangel up. So there you go. Now, the question I think should be asked is, should it be viable? Should it be viable? Should you be able to do decent amounts of healing while doing reasonable amounts of DPS? Is there a place in the game for someone who's 50-50ing it? Blizzard have said they want you to do 50% damage, 50% healing. That's how they want it to work, because that way it's the only way it can even be reasonably balanced. If you're able to do good damage and good healing, then that's too much. You're filling two roles there, and that's where Atonement ran into problems in the past. It just wasn't viable. If you're able to do all these kind of things, you're taking the place of two players, and that doesn't work out. They can't really have it doing weak on both, because then you're just completely replaceable. There's no point in you being there whatsoever. So the question is, should it be viable? Now, there's two stances to this. One is, yes, absolutely it should be viable. Why? You've dedicated an entire stance, an entire setup. I have to do things in order to generate this power, to become this player. I have to actually change away from being a pure healer into a dedicated stance that you've created for Warlords of Draenor, specifically designed around the idea of being a fist-weaving monk. You've given me these tools, these options, you've given me the way to do it, and you've dedicated time and resources into making that work. So yes, it should be viable, right? Then the other idea comes out, which I think is where I stand. DPS warriors have defensive stance. That does not mean they can tank. It doesn't. They have it in like an odd situation where it may occur. Similar to Fistweaving. If there's this odd time, which rarely occurs in Warlords of Draenor raiding from what I've seen so far, where there is weak damage, yeah, sure, you can go and do a little bit of damage and a little bit of healing. You're going to drop down on the healing meters, but whatever. Those are two completely viable points. One, time and resources, and one of the deciding factors of a Mistweaver, one of the things it was promoted and marketed at, was the idea of being able to do damage and do reasonable healing and have a raid place in doing that. The other side of that is, just because you have access to this thing doesn't mean it should be viable in a progression raid. It does not. And I agree with that. It shouldn't be. It doesn't mean it has to. Not that it shouldn't be, it doesn't mean it has to do that. For me, this is just the perfect opportunity to make a buff spec, a buff role in a raid, similar to a bard. And I think that would really appeal to a lot of people. It might be odd to think for some of you, but there are a significant amount of people who don't give a shit about topping the meters in any way, shape, or form. They don't care about that. They don't give a fuck about being number one and always chasing the dragon. They don't give a shit about that. They're quite happy to be in a multiplayer environment and supporting their team and getting things done, which is why this Atonement is now garbage. Fistweaving is now garbage and is completely replaceable. Your raid leaders would look at a Fistweaving monk and say, why would we, if you can do way less healing, which is obviously able to be covered by other healers, and you do crappy damage, why wouldn't we just bring another DPS in? Why wouldn't we do that? If we need more healing, we might as well bring another healer or just go full Mistweaver. It's for niche moments, like those periods of downtime, which are very rare, and do cost the Mistweaver a lot, because your preparation does suffer in certain aspects, or your Fistweaving sucks either way. It seems like a perfect opportunity to fill this role. And people will say, well, yeah, but that's another dedicated role. They would have a mandatory raid spot. That's fine. There's nothing. I think that's absolutely acceptable. It's perfectly acceptable to me to say that, yes, there is a role in the raid now for buff classes. And I think a lot of the vanilla shamans would be right there with me and say, yeah, the guys who specced into enhancement, although they were resto, sacrificed their healing in order to buff the melee or buff the casters in some way, absolutely adored that. They didn't give a shit about topping the meters. They knew that their contribution elsewhere was more than making up for their personal damage or personal healing, because they are raising the standards of everybody else. And there's easily opportunity here for both Atonement and for Fistweaving to fulfill that role and give people what they want. You do weaker damage, you do weaker healing, but you buff the raid elsewhere, which as a total package makes it well worthwhile. It makes raiding more fun because you're playing with buffs that you don't ordinarily have, and that's cool. That's very, very cool for me. I'm sorry to disappoint if people rolled a Mistweaver, and I think you're right to be disappointed if you rolled a Mistweaver with the intention that you could both do normal casted heal or go ahead and be viable as some sort of melee DPS healer hybrid. And the standard is right now is that it's just not worthwhile. It's not worthwhile to bring you if that's something you're intending to do or if that's something you've really enjoyed. In the outside world, I've done some level 100 stuff, and sure, you can survive most stuff. That's no problem at all if that's what you're worried about in soloing. A lot of people play monks in general to go out and solo stuff. Yeah, you can still do that. It just takes longer. It's not something I personally understand because I could probably do it better as a Windwalker or even as a Brewmaster, and therefore that would make more sense to me. But if people want to take longer to kill elites, who am I to judge? Overall, though, in a raid spot, not really. Not really. I can't see, off the top of my head, and maybe some people who dedicated themselves to Mistweaver, I only got to heal really on a Holy Priest on the Mythic and Heroic testing in Warlords of Draenor so far, is that I did not recall while I was healing, which I healed several encounters, and I DPS'd all of them, when there was periods where it was like, okay, this is a very relaxed period of time now. That's just not the way the game works. It doesn't seem to suit this style of play, and therefore I don't think it's ever going to be viable unless you just ludicrously overgear it, in which case it's not worth it anyway. You might as well, if you have that much gear, you might as well change to Windwalker and do significantly more damage, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. So there it is, guys. That's how it rolls. I see such a good opportunity here. I see such an amazing opportunity here to finally bolster the idea of buff classes. People love that. I like that kind of thing. I do. I like supporting my group. As someone who pays more attention to what everyone else is doing than what I do myself, I love that kind of thing. Managing stuff like a buff to casters, a buff to melee, and then switching to a buff for tanks if they need it at a certain amount of time. All this kind of stuff I find very interesting. And I will quite happily turn off my Skada. Quite happily, as long as I know that I'm contributing to the raid elsewhere. And think of this, well, I know there's a significant amount of people who have that mindset, especially in an MMO game. Alright guys, there you go. Fistweaving! Not viable. Sorry guys. Bye-bye.